Alright, welcome to Trig Notes Part 1 with our cosine ratio. We are going to be looking at what happens when you have a situation that looks like this, where you have an angle, the adjacent side, which is the side right next to the angle, and its hypotenuse, which, as you know, is the longest side or the side across from the 90 degrees. And that can be the same situation even over here. As long as you have your unknown angle or maybe even known angle, you're working with the adjacent side, the length of this side, and the length of the hypotenuse. So these are the two circumstances of what you'll be working with when to use cosine. So the ratio or formula, however you want to do it, for cosine is just that. The cosine, which is just a button on your calculator, of this angle is equal to these numbers divided by each other. So the length of the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse is going to be the same thing as if you take this angle and hit it into your calculator using cosine. Same exact quantities, kind of like equivalent fractions. So let's look at our different situations that we might see given these formulas. So with a triangle, initially you're going to have three possibilities. Either situation 1, where you don't know what the angle is. Situation 2, where you know the angle, which we're going to find from here, but you don't know the length of the adjacent side. Or situation 3, you know the angle, you know the adjacent side, but we don't know the hypotenuse of this triangle. And so we're going to show you how to be able to use the cosine ratio given these bits of information to be able to solve them. And it doesn't matter if that's up here for the angle and adjacent, or if your angle's down here and your adjacent's this length. As long as you have your angle and an unknown adjacent, or angle and unknown hypotenuse, these formulas would be exactly the same. So it's based off what do you know and what don't you know. So let's look at our situation 1. We have an unknown angle, we have a known adjacent side, and we have a known hypotenuse. Okay, so that's our trig ratio. 12 divided by 15. You already have it set up that way as long as you plug in this information. So we're going to go back to our formula. And please remember, you can pause at any time to copy down any information. And we're going to start substituting in what we know. So here is step 2. First we identify our bits of information. Then we get our formula. And say, okay, step 3, start plugging in our information. So I've determined I'm going to use my cosine. This is my cosine formula. Plug in my adjacent length, my hypotenuse length. And now I have literally just a division. So this next part is a little bit of your trigger of going that I have to find my angle. I actually have to use this formula here, which is the cosine to the -1 and then my ratio. And I'll show you how to do that on the calculator. So we can just skip. Once you know this information, know that you're going to use cosine, you can mentally plug it in and just go straight to this one here. So on your calculator, all you're going to do is hit second cosine, and you'll see I have that bit of information. That means I'm going to be finding my angle. And then I literally am just going to do 12 divided by 15. And that is the degree of my angle, which I rounded up to 36.9 degrees. Boom. I just figured it out. So technically the only calculations I did was secant 12 divided by 15. Second cosine 12 divided by 15, I found my angle. That's all you have to do to find your angle using cosine with your triangles. So let's try it with a situation of an unknown adjacent. So we are going to have, kind of just go back through our steps. We know our angle from our previous problem. We have our adjacent, which is unknown, hypotenuse, which is known. That creates my ratio. So that's your first step. What information do you know? What do you don't? So I'm going to use cosine because cosine deals with my adjacent and my hypotenuse information. So with each trig formula, you have to say, well, am I working with opposite and hypotenuse? No. I'm working with adjacent and hypotenuse. Yes, so I'm going to have my cosine. So I'm going to plug it in. Cosine of my theta, which was 36.9, x divided by 15. So using proportions, I'm going to multiply both sides by 15. And technically, you have your star here, which means this is your go-to spot, where as soon as you've decided this information up here, you can skip right down to this in your calculator. Looks like that, which comes out to equal that. And so in my calculator, all I have to do, and it doesn't matter whether you do cosine 36.9 first, times 15, or 15 times. So 15 times cosine 36.9. So that's all I've entered into my calculator. And I get 11.99, which is basically 12. Okay. So this is all I had to enter into my calculator. The hypotenuse, my angle, and I solved for my adjacent. So let's look at our last possible situation we have, which is what if we're looking for our hypotenuse. Again, step one, identify our pieces. We have a known theta, we have a known adjacent, and we have an unknown hypotenuse. Well, cosine deals with adjacent and hypotenuse, so that is the formula that we're going to use. And that is our ratio, or our formula. And I'm going to substitute in our bits of information. So I know my angle, I know my adjacent, but I don't know my hypotenuse. So remember, the trick basically is going to be switching these. Your end answer should be x equals 12 divided by cosine 36.9. And we do that by just going to do the long work, which is to multiply both sides by x, divide both sides by cosine of 36.9, and then that ends up being our initial answer here. So you can go from here to here if you just remember these have to switch. So the cosine of 36.9 is basically 0.8. So this is what you enter into your calculator. This works too, it's the same thing, to get our answer. So here's my excessive calculator work. Being sarcastic, obviously. 12 divided by cosine 36.9. Boom. And I get 15. Okay. So we have those three situations. So we're going to have Okay, so we have our 3 guided problems that I want you to be able to write down and try to do them on your own. Use the notes that we just took to be able to try to solve them, and I will work through them in just one moment. Please remember that you're going to, once you find the angle from here, you're going to use that angle to substitute into these 2 other problems. And so even though, yes, technically we already know the answers, that allows you to check your work to make sure you're doing it correctly even before we go through it. Okay. So hopefully pause the video, try to work through them, and then we're going to go over them now. So your first step, you always want to be able to say, okay, what did I need to do to figure that out? What are my pieces? So we're going to look at our notes here. So I said, okay, well, our adjacent is 32, our hypotenuse is 40. So my cosine, which is adjacent over hypotenuse, is the trig ratio that I'm going to use for this one. I'm not working with opposites. I'm working with adjacent and hypotenuse. That's my cosine. So I'm going to be coming down and say the cosine theta is equal to 32 divided by 40. So that's my key information. So what I'm actually going to want to plug in to my calculator is the fact that theta equals cosine negative 1, 32 divided by 40. Go to your calculator, second cosine, so I hit the second button, cosine button, 32 divided by 40. Enter. And what you see is we got 39 or 36.9 basically as our numbers. So theta equals 36.9 or 8.7 even. We can do that if we want to be a little bit more precise. Okay, so let's come to our second situation. So second situation says the fact that we have an unknown adjacent. So I'm going to look at our notes regarding what to do for an unknown adjacent. I'm going to plug in 36.87. My adjacent is x, my hypotenuse is 40. Because I'm working with adjacent and hypotenuse, I'm going to be using cosine as my formula. Second step is to start, technically, third step is going to be to plug us information in. So the cosine of 36.87 is equal to, well, here's my ratio, x over 40. So what am I going to type into my actual calculator? 40 times cosine 36.87. And that's going to give me x. To my calculator, 40 times cosine 36.87, and I get 31.999999, which is basically 32. Check. That's what I wanted. Okay, so I did that one correct. So down here, 32. So again, I know my theta is 36.9. I know my adjacent is 32 and my hypotenuse is x. So let's look at situation 3 of an unknown hypotenuse. I have adjacent information and hypotenuse, so I'm going to use cosine. I'm going to plug in my information. 9 or 8, what did we say, 8, 7? Equals adjacent 32 over x. Now remember, these two basically end up switching. When it's all said and done and you get through doing all the calculations, multiply both sides by x, divide both sides by cosine, you come down to that. So I'm just going to skip straight to there. You're switching these. X equals 32 divided by cosine 36.87. Go to my calculator. 32 divided by cosine 36.87, and I get 40. And that checks out of the side that we wanted. So I did my math right. So hopefully that's what you got. So let's go ahead and look at the next set. So here are the next 3 problems that I want you to pause the video and try to do on your own. They're going to be exactly the same process. Even though the angle is down here, the theta is down here, it doesn't matter. The question is, what do you know? What do you have? What do you know? What do you have? What do you know? What do we have? So here we have an adjacent and a hypotenuse, and we're missing the theta. Here we have a missing adjacent, so that's our x, and we have a hypotenuse. And we're going to use the same theta from this side over here. Okay? Here we have an adjacent, we have an unknown hypotenuse, and we're going to use the same theta that we got from our first problem over here. So feel free to please pause the video and start working through these 3 examples. Again, it's a process of building confidence and the fact that you have the skill sets to do it. So please pause the video and do the problems now. To work through these, so I'm going to again use my notes and I'm going to look at this. I have an unknown theta, so basically I'm just going to keep that theta. My adjacent is 18, my hypotenuse is 30. That means I'm going to work with cosine because, well, that's what cosine equals, is my adjacent divided by my 30. And so if we remember, our key formula is theta equals second cosine, the inverse, 18 divided by 30. Second cosine, 18 divided by 30. And my theta is 53.13. Okay, so let's look at situation number 2. I have an unknown adjacent, so I'm going to fold my notes over. My theta is 53.13. My adjacent is x. My hypotenuse is 30. I'm going to use the cosine of theta because I have an adjacent and a hypotenuse, and there's my formula. So what is this going to look like? basically I'm going to take my theta, my cosine, and times it by 30. So x equals 30 times cosine 53.13. So to solve for x, I multiply both sides by 30, and this is what I would get. So go to my calculator. 30 times cosine 53.13, and I get 18. That's what I wanted. Okay, situation number 3. Last but not least, I have my steps, my theta, we know is 53.13. My adjacent equals 18, and my hypotenuse is unknown. So here's my cosine. There's my formula right there. Cosine is going to equal 18 times x, which we know we're going to end up switching these to create my formula of what does x equal. So x equals 18 divided by the cosine of 53.13. Okay, so 18 divided by cosine 53.13, 29.9999999. So if we round that, we get 30, which checks out. All right, so welcome to your introduction to cosine. I hope this at least helps at the beginning. And if you have any questions, let me know. Have a good one.